You're listening to episode 786 of a Very Spatial podcast, May 31st, 2026. Hello and welcome to a Very Spatial podcast. I'm Jesse.
I'm Sue.
I'm Barb.
And this is Frank.
And this week, we're going to bring you great information from all over the world, such as, I don't know, we're going to talk about things. And Frank put a link in that we'll disagree with.
Probably.
And that's okay.
But, it'll be fun.
Duality. It's multiplicity. Come on. That'll probably make sense later. But first, some news. There's lots and lots of things coming up on the moon this year from the US and probably others as well, just not a manned mission. So there are multiple missions planned for dropping off various materials for the upcoming moon station, moon base.
Moon base. It's the coolest iteration of everything. It's moon base.
Will it be called Alpha?
It's in a Bond movie, for God's sakes. It is the coolest iteration.
And we'll see what happens.
Yes, but I will note that that in recent days there was unfortunately a setback for Blue Origin, so I'm not sure what timelines they're going to be operating on now.
Well, I'm not sure it was actually them launching. I think it was an item that was going to be deposited that they built. So it was a lander for Blue Origin. So less likely to blow up on launch. That's what Sue is referring to, of course, is the recent
launch test failure.
What was it you called it? A vaporization of?
I believe there was extensive damage to the launch pad, the facility.
Yeah, I was going to say the facility.
Yeah.
Pad just...
Yeah, it was rough.
It was a large ball of flame.
One of the plans is to have drones for surveying, and it just had me thinking about, how long this has been a dream. And a little nervous about it becoming reality, but also some of the plans people had for how things would be done have changed so much with recent technology because, drones weren't one of those things that were factored into anyone's imagination or planning. And now they're there to be used for this.
I don't know. I mean, we didn't call them drones. We called them, I don't know, what do we call them from Star Trek? Launch the... Probes. Yes, we've called them probes. Even in Star Wars, in fact, the probes that they sent to Hoth. So yeah, probes have been what we've called them, but it's the same thing. It's just that these will probably be sitting on the moon as opposed to hovering over the moon, which of course we saw the actual mini copter on Mars, which I think there's a second one being planned from. That doesn't matter.
Yeah, but Mars has a bit more atmosphere for one to do that with than the moon.
But, driving around, that's nothing wrong with that.
No, completely doable.
Yeah.
It's really exciting, I think. All these missions are essentially like dropping off supplies on a beachhead for somebody to come on later and build a thing. So that's what this is. But it's the first step. You got to drop the stuff off because you can't take it with you all in one shot because it's very heavy.
Well, we're jumping from and again, this is in this decade, a bypass of a unmanned drone to see if we could get one back out there, and then a manned flight. And now we're planning on having another 3 or 4 before the end of the year that are going to drop stuff off. So, we're ramping things up for the currently planned 2028 manned mission. See how it goes. Next up in the news, Niantic Spatial. Remember the spinoff from Niantic, or I guess that's still Niantic itself, and they spun off a lot of the game pieces, is working with Spexy to basically deliver drone to 3D to create, data for their ongoing building of their, I'm going to call it a spatial AI. I think that's what they call it, but the link's not working right now. So yeah, it's interesting and exciting, not entirely new, because they're just basically building data sets, and it's curious to see, how this is going to go. as they try to build out their physical AI.
You know, I had a conversation with some friends last night about AI, and I want to turn this into an AI conversation, but it is interesting to see. There's a lot of speculation about if AI is a bubble and if it's going to blow, when it's going to blow. But I really think that in the geospatial realm, there's a lot more depth or more momentum, because there's still a lot of stuff we can do at really basic data analysis and automation levels. So I understand why they're doing this way and why they should be doing more of it.
Which at some point in time, we should probably try to talk to the folks at NV5 about NV and ID. Oh, I just forgot the IDL. There we go. And their geo agents that they're pushing out through that. Put that on the list to do. Oh, wait. I'm the one who has to do that. Okay, never mind.
The University of Connecticut, Clark, and University of Maryland have created a lawn fertilizer tool. It's to help keep overuse of fertilizer out of the Long Island Sound. And this is really important because over-fertilization is impacting waterways, and a lot of people don't even realize that they're doing it. So they're basing it off of an NSYNC tool University of Connecticut created to show homeowners like hotspots where they live could drain into or get things into the water. I've worked on projects like this where you were trying to keep fertilizers out, because sometimes people don't realize how interconnected our water systems are. So I think this is a really great idea.
Yeah, I think that the least understood link by your average person, not experts, obviously we know about this stuff, but is the connection between your piece of property and the watershed. Some people know it, but in particularly I'm going to make an overgeneralization and say particularly in the northeastern part of the country, I think that understanding is not as robust as we really need it to be. People just don't realize what they're putting into the watershed and why it matters.
I'm going to expand your Northeast. I do think that, we have a lot of people there. So that's a big thing. Southwest as well, along the California coastal area. But I think really anywhere, and especially if you think about the people who are living in the middle of the country who don't think about the fact that, a drop of water in, I don't know, Iowa is going to end up eventually in the Gulf of Mexico. And, people don't necessarily think about that a lot of times.
And I think too that especially in coastal areas here in the U.S., right, is that is also rapidly changing. So something that you may already have known was an issue, and for those experts obviously did, but here in the Southeast, for example, those coastal communities where you have, homes that may be doing this now, what was once, farmland or even forest, right, is now developments. And so I think this is kind of a sort of cool example of how you can use mapping to make people understand, right, what they're doing, but especially those who might not have thought about it, who didn't think about it when they lived in one area, then moved to another area that already has a rapidly changing physical geography. And, they can see, hey, this housing development now of 250 homes, all of whom are fertilizing their lawns, is a really big change from what we saw just, 10, 15, 20 years ago.
And that's it for the news.
In the web corner, the UK is working on a new national curriculum, and the geographers there at the Geographical Association are providing a time scale and help for any geographers who are looking to know what this means for them, but also for how they can help to put some input. Where this is important for geography and GIS is a lot of times if you're trying to embed GIS and geospatial tools and concepts into your curriculum for the UK, now's the time to start discussing this. That's something that we've discussed and had sessions on in the US and other countries. I know they have the same sort of discussions of how do you embed GIS education at different stages of education.
Yeah, and I think it's really useful, right, to see how other places are tackling this challenge as well. So it doesn't have to necessarily directly affect you for it to be kind of a useful resource.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to see what resources they make available that can be implemented here.
And the topic this week, I ran across a blog post on geo careers that I thought was kind of interesting to talk about and think about.
A blog post? Those things still exist?
Yeah, they do. Not in VerySpatial, but they do exist in the world. What this blog post is essentially arguing using data from looking at jobs that were advertised or put out there for GIS careers is the GIS industry has actually split itself into two pieces. And they talk about industry A and industry B, but really we could name those a bit. Industry A is operational GIS, and those are your GIS analysts, your technicians, your coordinator, your specialists, your managers, people who are kind of using the software for lack of a better heuristic to describe it. And then industry B is geospatial software and data science. So these are the people who are actually writing code to write new things in GIS or doing deeper data analysis or data science. You'd find your remote sensors in here, for example. That's the type of people. And what they're arguing is that the operations people are economically a lower class. They don't use the term class. That's me. Than the software and data science people, just by looking at the salaries, the average salaries that come in. So the average salary for the operator sort of group was, I think, about 80,000, 75 to 80,000 a year. For the group B, the software developers and data scientists, it's closer to like 110, 120 a year. And this is US based primarily, I think almost exclusively. So we are talking about the United States. And so what they're saying is that we in the education side of things or the conceptual side of things, thinking about the GIS industry, have not really realized that it's not a industry. It's in fact two stratified industries. And we need to really do a better job of helping people move from the analyst side, the operations side, to the sort of development side if they want to, because they're not really given a pathway, particularly in the education side, for doing that. They have to kind of figure it out on their own. That's the, you'll see the link in the show notes, but that's the too long didn't read of more or less of what that's arguing in the blog post. I thought it would be a really interesting conversation topic to talk about. Do we agree with this? Do we think it's generally good, or do we think that it's missing the mark here? Maybe, to Jesse's preview earlier, maybe clustering into just two when that's probably over reductive, or could be over reductive.
It is overly reductive. I mean, we can talk to, the last 10 people who graduated from one or both or any of our programs, and they all ended up at different levels of this because of some of their comfort levels, some of their interests, some of their decisions of where they wanted to be. And it's not just operationalizing versus coding, because of course a lot of people in that second group are literally doing the exact same thing. They just have a different job title. They're using the exact same ArcGIS Pro. They're using the exact same analysis tools. They're not necessarily writing code. In fact, you're just as likely to write code on either side. But because your job description and you're working for a certain type of organization, usually a business, you're going to make more versus someone who's getting the job at a local municipality who's going to be making less. And then we can begin layering in, the different levels of expectations at companies and how that layers out. We can talk about a municipality versus a state versus a federal versus nonprofit versus, and so all of these things create these differences in how much the organization can pay, which really doesn't have as much to do with what the person's doing. Now, if someone is writing code, yes, they are more likely to be making more, but it's not, I don't even think that's the thing, even though that's kind of what they're building it on. It's just the fact that those are the companies who are paying more. But yeah, we have multiplicity.
Well, they touch on a couple of those issues. They talk about how the operations side, and again, I want to make sure that I'm not defending the article, I'm just reporting what it says. They make the argument that operations tends to be tied to government or government adjacent things a lot, which I thought was kind of interesting to think about. And I was sort of thinking, and part of this is because we're putting together a GIS program here at Fairmont State, where Barbara and I are both at. And part of this is I have to answer that question. What jobs are your graduates going to get? Where are they going to go work? And I was trying to think of really how prevalent, because it's easy to go, well, you can go work in a state government or local municipality, and then I was like, well, okay, what's the next thing? What are the other industries that are dominant? And so when I was mentally kind of going through it, I was like, there's a lot of people out there that are operationally using GIS that we just don't think about more broadly. And I'm like, well, there actually are a lot more jobs out there than just government. So I feel like that this article was a little reductive in that regard, but I get why they think that the majority of the job posts would suggest government or government adjacent. And I think adjacent covers a lot of ground. Like if you're doing logistics, for example, but it's to ship goods or services or something like that for government, or that the government touches on. I mean, is that adjacent or not? Just because you're buying a whole truckload of computers and it happens to be for government, that seemed to cover like category to me.
Well, I think when I was looking at this harkens back, right? Because this you're absolutely right. In building programs, when we're in education, we have to figure out not only how do we teach students that potentially want to come into the career, but how do we explain to them what the careers are, right? What is it that you're potentially preparing for? But a lot of kind of what I'm thinking about has been ongoing in spurts, right? And one of the things that I was thinking back to is, of course, the whole debate about is spatial special, which again, ongoing, right? It's how you come to it. So if you came to GIS out of geography, it's situated in what geographers think about, how geographers do things, where the GIS technology came from, right? And it's a chain that you learn in your education and then you go out and apply it in those areas. But with the rise of Web 2.0 and web mapping and all that, and we've talked about this many times on the podcast and many other places, but that whole idea was really where geospatial was encountered was as a data type among people that were already developing, working with software, creating solutions like that. And so to them, the solution, and I'm oversimplifying surely, but the solution was how to deal with this data set, geospatial data, and was it super unique and was that important, right? And we had debates about that. But that did, in fact, I think, solidify in the marketplace, because I'll still encounter students who are coming from the other area, from information science, from computer science, who will just casually drop that they dabbled. And so they wanted to learn a little bit more about, GIS. And they see it as an offshoot of what they're already doing. And on the other hand, the geographers and those using GIS that way will then say, well, I hear from job ads that I need to know Python, or I need to be able to do this, or I'm interested in doing this. And so, kind of the bleed over. But I think there is something there in the different way that geospatial is approached.
And I think that this is an all roads lead to Rome, where when I read this, it brought me back to this is an outcome of us not really being able to, as a profession, explain the totality of GIS and who we are, as underneath a big umbrella, and how we're all interconnected. And that this is something where you do have that invisible side that doesn't get as much attention because it's not visible. And then I think back to a session I was in at the ESRI Users Conference, where I was presenting on my dissertation. And someone from University of Redlands was talking to people about, don't get stuck in IT because you want to be where management and decision-making is. And I think that this idea of the split is a demonstration of that. Like, Sue, when you were talking about people that said they dabbled in it, they're coming from an area where people see them as decision makers and people who have insight, whereas for some reason they might not view other people in GIS the same way, which gets back again to people not really understanding who we are as one unit, one profession.
So kind of going back to what Frank was saying, we can talk about, government. We can talk about business to government. We can talk about business to business. We can talk about business to consumer as different aspects of this array as we're looking at it. And it all kind of brings us back to the other aspect that we often talk about of geomatics, or surveying specifically, and GIS. So that flip side, which is a similar separation, where surveyors tend to make a little bit more is because they're licensed. They have PLS and all that. And so they're a little bit different in that pay scale than the geographers in this group. And again, it's who they're working with and who they're selling to that kind of plays that out. But it's also the question of a thing that I haven't incorporated as much. I've done it a little bit, but not as much as I probably should, is pushing heavily into the geospatial data science end of things. So I'm still focusing my intro GIS classes on GIS, geospatial data, interacting with it in those traditional ways and not pushing the data science portion of it as much. And I think that's where you get that separation, especially whenever you're not talking about government, but looking at how companies are working with other companies, so that B2B area, and where a lot of our students could make a lot more money if they went into that portion of the economic sector as opposed to the government or even doing code sometimes. Having that data science can filter a lot more.
So the article makes an argument that I thought was interesting. So let's talk a little bit about that, because it directly talks about what you're mentioning there, Jesse, which it's saying that the idea of the analyst engineer split is not unique to GIS. Lots of industries have it, but our industries seem to have that more hidden than they do, or less explicit in other industries. And what they argue is that we teach operations, and our entry into GIS is almost exclusively operations. And in most cases, we don't really teach that there is an engineering aspect of it you could be doing, or data science aspect that you could be doing. And we don't really have the on-roads, particularly in education, for them to explore that. It's something you kind of have to find on your own once you're in the industry, working in operations and going, hey, the thing that these people are doing seems very interesting to me. I'd like to go learn more. And you kind of pick this up on your own. I thought that was an interesting point, and certainly one worthy of debate. I think that there's something there, just like you said, in the intro classes, where maybe not necessarily teaching the breadth as much as we could be. But on the other hand, I completely contradict myself. I think of something like math. You're not going to teach in algebra the existence of calculus and Calc 2 and Calc 3. I mean, there's a step pattern for a reason. You got to learn this so you can learn that, then you can learn this other thing. It can't just, it's hard to expose everyone to all the things without creating confusion in such a way that maybe it turns people off. So there's two forces I think are at war with each other. And to throw a third sort of complicating factor in here is what Sue talked about, depending on how you come at this. If you come at this as a geographer, maybe you don't teach it because you don't really know it. That's not really your background. You teach what you know, right? So you tend to think of it like a geographer and think about it in terms of operations. So that was an interesting piece that I think we could tease out a little bit further.
And okay, just because I don't want us to, I don't want people to question this later on. I do want to point out that whenever we do say that we're teaching operations, that's an aspect, but we're also hopefully teaching critical thinking and all of these things that are part of the deeper ideas that data scientists and data engineers use. We're just not necessarily calling it that a lot of times.
Well, no, I think you've got an interesting point there. I think that one of the interesting pieces is if you talk to an historian or a political scientist or an English person, they don't get a job. They don't tend to get a job working in the math factory, doing math on the math factory floor. I've said this before. It's you take what you've learned in the basic skills, critical thinking and inquisitiveness and ability to learn new things, all that stuff like that. And you use that core to grow and do something that would be a recognized, job title. So psychologists are a great example. Psychologists, because I recently had to research this for my other half of my job, is something like 21% of psychologists actually go into clinical psychology. So the overwhelming majority go do something else that utilizes psychology. And that's kind of, to some extent, how we, I think, approach geography, and therefore how we approach GIS. It's, I'm giving you the base layer, go be what you want to be because you've got the necessary skills to move in the directions that interest you as you move into this or through your career.
And I think that that goes back to when you were talking about it depends on, where you end up both regionally, but in what type of job or industry. So I think that this isn't just a difference in the job titles, but those job titles within whichever industry, which, we're embedded in everything. So it could be based more on what their interest is in and the industry that they end up in, which could be municipal, could be business, could be logistics, biology, anything like that. But also I'm seeing a difference between remote work and, work on the ground in terms of salaries and, job potential, almost to the point of having two different pay grades, even, within a state like ours.
Well, and I think some of this too is, if you look at it from a kind of a different perspective, it's not so much that the GIS industry split. It's that I think we were never a whole to begin with, maybe.
It's the reason we call it geospatial technologies,
right? Yeah,
for our certificate as opposed to.
And I think a point being made, right, is that there are two parallel things that people didn't necessarily know crossed over until, again, we started to see that rapid rise in exposure from the mid 2000s, right, from Google Maps, from web mapping, that changeover, because it exposed the two sides to say, wow, we actually are doing simple things, or there's stuff you're doing that I'd really be interested in. And what I take away a little bit from this is that, right, there's always been an ability in the tech side to pay people more, or a tradition where, right, that's more. We need to bring in people on the computer science and information side. So to do so, we pay them more. We have the capability to do it, right? And on the GIS side, the evolution, I think, of those pay scales, right, are where for a long time, most of the people with that skill set, that background would go to, and their pay bands were lower. And so, again, the awareness of each other is when you start doing the direct comparison, because now you can plan ahead and say, there's so much crossover, so which kind of thing do I want to do? And I thought that the article actually did do a good job kind of saying, look, here's the tracks where they are now. But we struggled, right, trying to say, trying to envelop the whole geospatial end of things maybe into GIS and say, well, we are doing the same thing. But I don't think that it necessarily ever happened. And so the conception, right, the long-standing idea that you need to have six figures in that, information science realm, there was never really kind of recognition we're directly competing with that. So,
and I also think there's an element of ignoring how tiny GIS shops are on average. I mean, there are companies that have, dozens and dozens of geospatial experts in one form or the other working for them. That's certainly true. But the vast majority of governmental, particularly small government shops, you're talking about maybe 2 or 3 people, maybe. So people have to wear different hats. Today, I'm doing a straight up analysis. Tomorrow, I'm doing cartography. And in between that, I'm working about a database backup replication problem and just firing it off and then keeping an eye on it. There's a lot of those skill sets that you have to develop because somebody in the office has to learn how to do. And there's only 2 or 3 of you, so you're going to learn a lot of things. And sometimes you'll sort of work your way towards a particular pole, but more often than not, you're going to have to do a lot of things you don't really love. And I think that there's not the recognition that to Jesse's original point, that many times the division is in your own brain for what I'm doing this hour as much as anything.
I think one thing that we don't talk a lot about whenever we're talking about choosing a job, choosing a career, and these things are changing, I think, even more now, is the fact that it's not always about the dollar signs. There are a lot of people who choose to go for those lower paying jobs because they're the ones that are going to have direct impact on the community. So whenever you're talking about somebody who's working in GIS in a local township or a county or in a city, you're having a direct impact on decisions that are being made in that location. And if that's a place that you love, that you want to have an impact on, you're going to choose potentially that job over, those other opportunities of a software engineer where you have to move away from that place, or you're not having that same direct impact. You're creating tools that that person's going to be using as opposed to being the person who's using them. So you do have that variation as well. So it's not one versus the other. We all recognize that, I think, as we're talking at the end of the semester, as we just were, to a lot of students who are still trying to figure out what they want to do, having those conversations of, you could go this way, but if you really want to stay in this location, then these are some of the things you might want to think about. And you might have to give up some of the opportunities for that location that you're choosing.
Well, I think too, and I also think, though, you have to be practical with students, because there is a lot of, as is pointed out, right, things have solidified. So in a company structure or an agency structure, you get people who will replicate, right, the requirements that they had, or they'll go out and say, well, so-and-so that I work with says that this is the kind of person I need. And the degree in how your job is defined will screen people out. So that is a challenge, right? Because even though you might be someone with a geography major and you've done 2 years of Python and you've done all this other stuff, if the screen out for the job you're going for is computer science degree, you're gonna struggle if that's the stream you want. So I think that's a challenge, right? To kind of give students that awareness when you're advising them at the early levels, is that there are some things that just, because we could take a look at, these kinds of data and say, well, maybe your problem isn't which lane. It's like, why are there 2 lanes? And you know what I mean? There's lots of ways you could approach that part of it. But the reality is that in this day of hiring, right, increasingly and if not before, increasingly now, we'll just have these things that cut people out of the pool right away. And the degree might be the beginning one.
But there's also the fact that, and we see this every day, and I'm sure you guys do it at Fairmont as well, that, there are students who, and we all probably fall in this ourselves, that students who do well in certain areas. And so if you don't do well in the sciences, it doesn't mean that you're not meant for college. It means that maybe you need to look at something like geospatial technologies or something like that, as opposed to straight CS. You might need to look at, how you can help the world from looking at the physical geography as opposed to doing the hard math of a physics or a chemistry degree. So these are, realities as well. And so it's not, you have to choose a specific degree. You can still get to a lot of these same pathways in different degrees as well. So yes, I agree. But the reality of getting through college is also there.
Yeah. It's just another piece of information, but I do think
No, I agree.
It's something that it's a practical thing you have to take into consideration.
And I also wanted to bring in that, GIS is often a pathway to jobs that are outside the GIS profession. It's still, a foot in the door sometimes into areas where if people, start out in a small municipality, but they ultimately want to be the manager of a larger city, that sometimes it's the, taking the long view of that path, and it's a way to do that. And there are a lot of other professions and business and logistics, intelligence, and other areas where GIS still starts you a little bit higher than other entry level jobs.
Yeah, we'll keep giving the example now 20 years ago or more of the undergrad who did a workshop that Sue and I were doing on .NET. And because of that, he went to his Esri interview and he got the job because he had done that workshop. And so he had some understanding more than the people he was competing with. So something as simple as that can have a huge impact on where you actually end up.
It's kind of funny because I think about the origins of GIS. When it really became a system, it was just a collection of tools, really, that you ran in whatever order to do the work that you needed to do. And that's kind of how our industry has continued to develop, right? It's a collection of skill sets that you kind of intermix as needed, and you dip into a little bit here and a little bit there. And it's always evolving quite a bit, and new stuff is coming online. GeoAI was not a thing 5 years ago that anyone cared about, but now it's a bigger thing that people started to care about because this new technology has come on board. Will it be in 5 more years? That's up to debate. But the point is that in 2000, Google Maps, that type of thing was not something anyone ever cared about. In 2010, it was everything everyone cared about. Our technology is constantly evolving, so you do need those sort of skill sets to move around to pick up different areas and to say, oh, that's interesting to me. I want to kind of go into that and take a seminar in a particular technology, or pick up something and say, oh, and run with it if you like it, or don't. If you go, I don't like this. This is not interesting. An area I, for example, did that with is geodatabases, like enterprise geodatabases. I don't find them particularly interesting. I can do them, but I don't want to. So I'm not really specialized in that area. So, you can explore something and go, that's not my thing.
I can't think of many professions that do let you be so creative with your career path. Like Frank said, stacking up tools and what you're learning and continuing to learn throughout your career, and to make those shifts. When we all know people that have made that shift, I do think things are splitting into multiple areas that are solidifying, but also I know so many people that are moving between all those, for different jobs at different stages in their career and life.
So to sum up, I think this article is very interesting, and I would highly recommend you read it, end to end, and see what they have to say. I walked away from this thinking, okay, I see what they're saying, but I don't think it's quite as solidified as they want to suggest. There's a lot more intermingling than we necessarily acknowledge. And also, I kind of feel it did give me some inspiration to start thinking about our intro classes and saying, maybe I do need to talk about these things, maybe in your digital earth or something like that, a little more fully, to talk about the breadth of what you can do in this degree, so our graduates have at least some idea of what it is that they may be able to move into.
On to the Events Corner. As always, we encourage you to check out these events. First up is the Commercial UAV Expo. It's going to be taking place the 1st to the 3rd of September in Las Vegas.
CAGIS Conference will be September 8th through the 11th in St. Louis, Missouri.
The North American Cartographic Information Society, NACIS, will be taking place on October 21st through 24th in Milwaukee.
And finally, Geo Week is taking place February 23rd to the 25th in 2027, obviously, in Salt Lake City, Utah. The call for speakers is now open.
Of course, if you want us to add your event to the podcast, send us an email to podcast@veryspatial.com.
If you'd like to reach us individually, I can be reached at sue@veryspatial.com.
I can be reached at barb@veryspatial.com.
I can be reached at frank@veryspatial.com.
I'm available at Kinda Spatial, and of course, if you'd like to find any of our contact information, head over to veryspatial.com/contacts.
As always,
we're the folks from Very Spatial.
Thanks for listening.
And we'll see you in a couple weeks.
But you keep bringing light. My eyes be closing tight, and you became my vice inside this time. The way you keep me high, all drunk off of your thighs. It's like this time a crisis isn't mine. Ooh, hold me and take me away from this life I've created inside my head. This time I promise I will stay. Hold me and take me away from this life I've created inside my head. This time I promise I will stay.